Hello and welcome to Game Music Composition. My name is Chris Latham and I'm the course director for the class, and I will be hanging out with you throughout the month. Today we're going to start our first session. We'll discuss an overview of the class, talk about what you can expect from the class, and what we expect from you for the class. We'll discuss all of the assignments, the topics, and we just have a lot of very interesting things to discuss over the course of this month. So we have our two live classes on Tuesday and Thursday from 3:30 to 5, and I will archive and record everything and send out a link to the archive on the next day, Wednesday and Friday. So you can always catch up there. Today's Tuesday class is a bit different than the rest of the month, where we're going to discuss the class as a whole. We'll talk about an overview of each week and the classes and the assignments. But starting next Tuesday, you will have turned in your first round of assignments, and we have peer review each class, the first class of each week. After you've turned in your round of assignments, you can submit any of the work from that week, and we can take a listen to it and discuss it as a whole. So everybody gets to see different approaches and different compositions and different solutions to each one of our game projects. So as a whole, the month is really focused towards introducing you to this side of the industry, the games industry, and show you that your music is just as viable in a video game as it is in any one of the many different formats that you've experienced so far. So whether it's music for an album, music for a film, or a commercial, or jingle, or music library, we kind of take you through all of the different steps as you progress through your different courses and kind of expose you to different parts of the industry. And so now we'll take a look at the games industry and kind of break down what is involved in a game project, the skills that are expected from a game composer, what sort of things do you bring to the table, who do you work with, how are projects built and developed over the course of a full game. We'll talk about the technical aspects and the creative aspects. I should probably flip those around and say more towards the beginning of the month, we discuss the creative aspects of building a music soundtrack for a game. We talk about theme and character and the design of the composition, the arrangement of the tracks, how the music is built and separated out into its individual components so that it can be rearranged and put back together by the computer for the game. We'll talk about how the music is built for a game experience that ultimately the composer doesn't know the final result of what's going to happen. Anybody who picks up a controller and plays a game will probably have a different experience for every single time they play it and every person that plays that game. So that experience might be a little bit different, or it might be wildly different, but it is going to be a bit of a unique experience for each player that plays the game. And so your music has to be able to react and change to whatever is happening on screen. So we will talk about one large topic that we discuss is the idea of linear versus nonlinear music, or the interactivity of your music in a game. So for the fact that most music that you've probably ever worked with or certainly listened to is in a linear format, because that's the way most music exists. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there is a particular structure to that music and a particular flow. We build our music around tempo and time signature and verses and choruses and intros and outros and a very specific form and timeline to our music. But in a game, the idea of when a player is going to solve that puzzle or find that secret or defeat that enemy or get the highest score, we don't ultimately know when those things are going to happen, but our music needs to react to the changes and the interactivity in the game. Music for a game doesn't exist in one long file on the game disk somewhere. Compare that against a movie. When you watch a film in the movie theater, or you watch it at home, you stream it online, or you put in a Blu-ray disc and play it, there is a 2-hour long audio file that represents all of the music and sound and dialogue for that movie. Plays from beginning to end. They craft the mix in a very specific way to provide the best experience and mix the music, sound effects, and dialogue together to give you the exact same experience, whether you are in a movie theater or at home. And every time you rewind back and play that movie, it's going to be the exact same. However, in a game, everybody who is going to play through your game is going to play through it in a different way. Some people are going to run through it as fast as possible, blowing by large chunks of the gameplay and maybe even the music soundtrack. Other people are going to be going in circles, knocking into walls, taking a very long time to figure out where the next part of the story is or where the next part of the game is. And that's perfectly fine because our music needs to be able to react to all of those differences. So we will talk about creating a music soundtrack in a way that can react to changes. It can basically kind of lengthen or shorten compared to how the game is being played at any one moment. And we will talk about how the individual music files or pieces of your music or music cues, how those are put together and arranged and rearranged to create what feels like a linear piece of music when somebody plays the game. When you play a game, you probably are not aware that, or a general player may not be aware that the music is not just one long file that plays from beginning to end. People can easily play games for quite a long period of time. You can either bring out your phone and play for just a few minutes. You can play a console game and play hours on end. Over time, people can easily put 10 or 20 or 50 or over 100 hours of content and action in a game. So that doesn't mean that there's a 100-hour long audio file that plays from beginning to end that represents the full soundtrack. The music exists in little pieces and parts that can be arranged and rearranged in sync with the action that is playing on screen. So we will talk about how do we, start from nothing, start from an idea, start from kind of a design of how the music is going to work, and how do we figure out how to build the music, compose it, and format it, and prepare it so that it's going to play back and work correctly in the game. I should take a step back to say that the creation of music for a game is very much the same as the creation of music for a music album or for a film. It is still composition, it is still music theory, it is still production, working with its recording and performances and working with artists and working with different layers of composition and working with your DAW and automation and plugins and formatting and all of those common aspects of music production is still all there for video games. It's just how do you apply the music once you have your composition? how do you build it and format it specifically for this game project. And so we will talk about what is the same in music for games and what is different and unique in the process of building a music soundtrack. So, jump over here. So I was beginning to start with the classes and talk about how the month is going to divide out. We have our Tuesday class today. As I mentioned, it's going to be a bit of an overview of the class, and towards the second half, we will certainly dive into your week 1 assignments and your first game specifically. Then the rest of our Tuesday classes, we will have the opportunity for peer review. So there is an assignment on FSO where you can submit your weekly compositions, and we will take a listen to it, and everybody is certainly encouraged to submit so that for the individual that submits their project, not only are you going to get your grade and written feedback, but we can talk our way through it, especially if you can make it to the live session at that same time. Then you can ask questions and we can discuss back and forth your composition. But for everybody else that may not submit, they get to see a wide variety of different approaches to the project. And if there's anything that might be tripping you up, then you might see some other options of how to approach that. If you have any questions, we typically will address kind of as a group, maybe things that people are doing that you might want to avoid. And then we'll also focus on really good ideas and point out the direction that you might want to head with positive ideas. So hopefully it certainly becomes beneficial for everyone. And over the course of the month, typically more people participate as they see that it's valuable to kind of share your music and share your ideas of how this all works together. So that's Tuesdays. We will talk about the previous week's assignments in a peer review, and then we will talk about the new assignments. So starting next week, we will discuss week 1 assignments and then dive into the new week 2 assignments. Then on Thursday, it is more of an open session where you can come with questions. We can discuss any issues that you might be having with the project. If you want to have me listen to anything, we can load it up. We can share the screen and discuss any aspect that you need. I also have a couple of topics that I will go into and kind of discuss more about the industry, getting started in the industry, how things work, describe the kind of process and workflow that your music might go through in a professional game project. And really, this is to show you the role of a game composer, what they bring to the table, how to get involved, and to give you a sense of if this is the type of work that you might be interested in. Hopefully, often we kind of pique people's interest in a new part of the industry and show you that as you create music, it is viable in a lot of different media. So that is where we are headed to start out. Myself, again, my name is Chris Latham. I'm the course director of the class. I've been with Full Sail for about 15 years now, and started out in the studios, started out in the recording arts degree program, working in the studios and working in the post-production classes before there was any sort of game audio class. And that's kind of where my background was before Full Sail, was production for commercial and television work. And then I've always been a very passionate gamer, loved music, loved sound design, loved the tech and the nerdiness of all of the software and all of the interesting media coming together. So I certainly dove into audio projects, game projects as soon as let's say about 8 or 10 years ago, technology really started opening up so that a lot of people could get access to what was going on inside of these games, and got involved in lots of different game projects, and have started the game audio classes at Full Sail. So I don't know, about 5 to 7 years ago or something like that, we started game audio on campus, and then the music production degree came along, and this game music composition class came along, so we jumped over here to start this up. Please reach out and contact me. You will also be working with Tony Anderson. He's the face that you see, and a lot of the contact information that you see on FSO. You can reach out to him, especially about questions about the assignments and the materials in the class, the grading, and all of those aspects. I'll be doing all of the classes, the live lectures. I'm also teaching on campus. I'm available a whole lot on Mondays in my office for any chats or answering any emails or anything from over the weekend. And then I am on campus teaching class on Wednesdays and Fridays, so I'm less available at that point. But certainly on Tuesdays and Thursdays when we have our class, we can either set up a live go-to training session where we can chat back and forth, or if you want to talk about anything after the live classes. So you can certainly iChat and email are going to be the best ways of getting in contact with me. Not always at my desk. Like I said, I'm out teaching on campus quite a bit, so you can certainly call and leave a voicemail, or certainly I will answer when I'm at my desk. Again, Monday, I'm going to be in the office quite a bit. If you reach my voicemail, then also send me an email because I can respond quite readily to that. Beyond Full Sail, I have a game audio contracting company called Engine Audio, where we've worked on a number of different game projects. It's kind of where we focused all of our game audio expertise, and working on a variety of different games over the years. Got hooked up with EA Sports. They are here in Orlando, or at least the Tiburon Studios, a portion of EA Sports, is in Orlando, Florida. And we've worked on a couple of different game projects, most recently Madden 17 and a little bit of NBA Live 17. Also worked on a game that is on Steam called Depth. It is a shark versus diver multiplayer online underwater kind of fear and first-person shooter kind of game. Did all of music and sound effects for those. Well, not all the music, but all the sound effects, music implementation, and game implementation. iOS and Android projects. So a lot of different variety of projects out there have been involved in, and more recently some. There's a lot of opportunity in VR and AR and virtual reality, 360 video, where you can move your phone around inside of a video sphere or screen. There's a lot of different avenues for interactive audio and media, especially as new technology is constantly moving forward. So, a couple of quick disclaimers about the class that I want to get out of the way pretty early on. And the first one is you don't actually have to be any good at playing video games, to be successful in this class. This class is certainly not about being able to get the highest score or the fastest time in the game, or being able to play the game with any sort of skill overall. I certainly know that a lot of my students, we've tested it out on campus. We've had game days where I get wiped. They wipe the floor clean with me in these games, and that's perfectly fine because I enjoy working on games more. Well, certainly enjoy playing games. It's a big part of it overall, but there's not a bar of entry for your level of skill in success in this class, because the skills that are important are the ones that you have been developing over the classes as you've been working your way through the degree program up to this point. So your skills in music theory and music production, understanding your DAW and being able to take a a client's intentions for a piece of music and render it into an actual composition. Your ability to understand what is needed from a particular game project and end up with a complete piece of music that kind of follows the guidelines that are necessary. Which is very much what you've been working on in all of your different classes. It just so happens that it's applied to a video game at this point. And that's very true in the industry. As a music composer, you are hired for your skills to create the music soundtrack, not necessarily to code and implement it into the game. And so that gets me to my next disclaimer that certainly for this class and really for the industry in general, programming skills are not required to be a music composer in the games industry. This is often a very early question that happens, certainly in the class. We also have a lot of industry people come to campus, industry veterans in game audio and game music, and they come to speak to our students. Most recently, we had last month, or just a week, 2 weeks ago, we had Hall of Fame on campus, and we had Jonathan Mayer come back through, who is a graduate from the early 2000s, and he works as a senior music manager at Sony, and has a lot of experience working in some pretty massive games like the Uncharted series and God of War and Last of Us. One of the main questions that is often asked is, I'm in the music production degree program and the recording arts degree program, and I know audio, I know sound, I know music, but do I need to be able to code in order to be a music composer or a sound designer for games? And the big answer is certainly most often a no, because, well, any extra set of skills that you have is certainly always valuable overall. But as a requirement to work as a music composer, it's certainly not a predetermined requirement. So now, if there is a technical aspect to this whole process of building your music, just as much as there is a technical aspect to music composition, especially like music production, using your DAW, recording, microphones, gear, bouncing out, different file formats, all of that, those technical aspects beyond just the music. Same sort of thing in games. There's a technical aspect to how your music works in a video game, which is separate from the compositional aspect. So, two very important disclaimers that I always want to get out of the way is you don't actually have to be any good at playing video games to be successful in the class, and you don't need to program or code. Now, there is some technical aspects and certain things that I'll talk about and I'll show you. It's important to be able to have a technical discussion with a programmer or game developer, and you often spend some time in the beginning of a project coming up with a common language where everybody can interpret. But just as much as your programmer can't write you a piece of music, your musician is not expected to write any code. So I always want to bring those points up pretty early on. And the next one here, goals of the class, things that we are prepared to discuss and things that we want to tackle over the course of the month. First and foremost, and quite importantly, is writing music. That's mainly what we are here for. As I mentioned before, it's just so happens to be for the purpose of games, but your main goal is to compose and write the music in a particular way that works for the game. As you progress through all of your different classes, especially later on here in the degree, you are working on portfolio material that you can add to a portfolio and demo reel that gives you the ability to show off the work that you've done. And this is very much the same thing. We have a couple of different game projects for you to work on. Two games in particular. They are fully working, functioning Mac games that you will place your music and your sound effects. You will create the full soundtrack and all of the sound effects along with it, and create it in a format that works to play back in the game. You'll test it out, play the game a couple of times, listening to your music and sound effects, and go back and make any tweaks if necessary. And then ultimately you'll create a series of video captures that show your music demonstrated in the game and playing everything back. There's no better way to show off how your music works in the game than actually putting it in the game and testing it out. So our primary goal here is certainly to work on projects and write music for those games. The next one here is certainly play video games. A big goal of this class, or a big concept or an idea that I have all the way through, is the idea of game research. And game research means you need to be playing video games. And I understand that folks coming through this class have a wide variety of experience with games. There are folks that haven't played a video game since throwing quarters into Pac-Man, or playing Tetris, or Minesweeper on their computer, or there are folks that eat and live and breathe games. They're up on all the newest and latest games, the newest technology, and the industry as a whole. And either side of that spectrum is perfectly fine for this class. Certainly if you love games, I can nerd out with you all day long. We can chat about games and the games industry and technology and what's going on currently. And if you don't play games, well, we certainly immerse you in the games industry while you are here. We'll talk about games. You have game projects to work on and games to play. And we'll just kind of, as I mentioned before, kind of expose you to this part of the industry and give you a sense of whether you even like it or not. People come out of the class saying, nope, I'm never going to do that type of work again. And other people absolutely love it and want to dive further into it and find that there's a lot of opportunity in the industry. The industry's constantly growing. There are often more projects every single day that need music and sound, every single one of them. So there's a lot of opportunity, especially in the indie side of things. It's not anymore that you can only get your video games by going into a store and paying for the box off the shelf, paying $60 for a game and putting it in your $300 game console. Now there are smartphones and tablets. There's online distribution like the App Store, the Google Play Store, and Steam for games, where games are distributed for 99 cents or for free, or they're independently distributed. They have downloadable content and updates, and there's all sorts of different ways that games are finding success. And so if you are interested in the games industry, that means you need to be playing a lot of video games. Just in the same way as if you are interested in the music industry, you need to be listening to a whole bunch of music. A lot of people coming through the degree program are interested in being songwriters, producers, engineers, an artist in some way, and you should be listening to tons of music, all sorts of different styles, different genres, what is popular and what is good, and pay attention to the artist and the producer and the record label and the recording studio, how they did it, what their process was. If you're interested in the film industry, you should be watching a lot of film. You should pay attention to the composer and the director and the producer, the film studio, the behind the scenes, any idea of videos of the process and how they created and what they thought about the music. And if you are interested in the games industry, you should be playing a lot of video games. You should be up on new games and new technology and the music and the composers, the game developers and the game publishers, the industry as a whole, and the technology that's involved. And that means playing a lot of video games and paying, not just, obviously, video games are fun, playing video games is enjoyable, but it's also listening to the music, analyzing, paying attention to the changes and how the music interacts with the game itself. And with all of this music and video game playing, there is still a lot to learn. There is a lot of knowledge to be had in all of this. There's a lot of discussion of approach and tools and workflow. And there is certainly a reason why the industry is really quite small. And, well, one aspect is it's new and constantly growing, where the film industry and the music industry can certainly date back into the early 1900s, and I mean, maybe even before that. The games industry is certainly started late 70s and 80s, and has absolutely exploded, certainly past 2000 to the new millennia. The game industry keeps growing and growing and growing because there's a lot of room to grow. It's still quite new, and that provides a lot of opportunity for folks. So let's talk about FSO. Let's get into the assignments, and we'll talk about the overview of the class and what to expect. So I have that over here. Let me know if you have any questions as we're going along. Hello, Tori. And I'm going to take a quick pause, and I'll be back in just a moment. Hold on. Okay, so let's do a quick overview of FSO so you know what to expect here, and it'll give us an outline of each of our weeks. The first couple of activities are introduction and course policies. Instructor contact info is always important. Can reach out through a message. Watch out for assignment comments. They may not always come through, so writing a direct message is always a good way to go. Professionalism policy, late policy, FSO support. Getting into week 1, we're going to start by talking about your 2D platformer game composition assignment. After I go through everything, that's the first assignment we'll dive into. And the session preparation is a series of videos that goes a bit deeper in logic and how you might approach and build this session. There is an assignment dealing with looping game music. It shows you a series of editing techniques and in creating a looping music file. Looping music is extremely important in game soundtracks because it allows you to musically stay in one spot while the player takes a while to solve a puzzle or find a secret or defeat an enemy. It allows you to stay in one place and go around and around with a couple of different tricks to make sure it doesn't get too repetitive or annoying. Here is the optional feedback and peer review assignment. You can submit your 2D platformer game composition here, and we'll take a listen to it. We'll load it up in Logic. This is a couple of examples, but basically the same thing, where we will load up all of your music tracks into Logic, and we will take a listen to them and kind of point our way through different ideas and issues that might need to be addressed. Tuesday and Thursday virtual classes is a link to the live class, and each week, as an announcement posted up on FSO, I will provide a link to the 2 class assignments. I try to post those up by Wednesday and Friday. And each week there is suggested reading and viewing chapters in your book. You have the game music composition book, which I think looks like... let's do this, sorry. Looks like that, or at least the cover does. And by Winfred Phillips. It's a great source of continued information. The class, well, the ideas and content are very much the same, but the class loosely kind of follows the order of the book. It might jump around a little bit, but you can find great information, kind of dives a little bit deeper than what we can get to in just the couple of hours that we meet here. And certainly picked this one because it is fully game music. There's a lot of different game audio texts out there that have a chapter on game music, but to have everything fully developed into the full text is always a plus. Then, let's see. So your game composition, your main game, the main project of each week. The music composition for this first game, 2D platformer, happens in week 1. And then in week 2, you will do all of the sound design for it. So first week, you will do the music. Second week, you will do the sound effects. Once you've completed all the sound effects, put them into the game and tested everything out, then you will do a game capture. You will use QuickTime and a program called Loopback to capture the video and the audio. And a video will be the best way to show off your work and show off what you have done. You can share the video very easily, and people can check out how your music works and how it's sounding. There is the composition description. It is set up as a test, but it's basically a series of questions about your composition. You hold all the answers because it is your composition, but it asks to provide all of the media files, all of the WAV files, screenshots, the video capture, information about your composition. What instrumentation did you use? The key and the tempo and the time signature that your composition is in. Asks you to bounce everything out and give screenshots of the actual bounced WAV files, and then rearrange them and put them together like the computer will, or like the game will, to get a sense and display how your music is actually working. So it's basically a post-mortem or summary of your 2D platformer composition. Again, we have peer review and feedback available for week 2. Each week we have all of the slides available for each one of the classes, and more reading and viewing. And so the same kind of flow in the rest of the month. We'll have a new game where you will compose in the first week and do all of the music, and all of the sound design in the second week, and do a video capture of that game. We also have a chiptune composition in week 3. We'll talk about the history of music for games and to give a sense of how music worked. We do have a chiptune composition that will use the original limitations of a Nintendo, the original Nintendo Entertainment System, to give you a sense of what it was like to write music for some of these early formats. And we'll get into that later on in the month. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what is coming up and how the assignments are working, how they are laid out. But let's talk much deeper about about your first game, a game called 2D Platformer. Hold on, I'm going to take another quick pause here. I'm going to let the game roll, or let the video roll, and show you what the game looks like. Hold on. I'll be right back. Oh, by the way, there's no audio currently. I don't have it set up to broadcast, but when you download this assignment, you get this video to check out. See if I can set this video up to loop. I think that should work. Yeah, there it goes. So, this game is made by Unity Games, powered by Unity technology. This is built using the Unity game engine. If you play games, especially a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games are made in the Unity game engine. Quite popular overall. And all of it's kind of like saying my game or my music was recorded in Pro Tools or Logic. It's a big, popular tool that people use to make games, just as much as we use Logic to make music. Excuse me. And so this is a demo game provided by Unity Games. It's kind of like a Logic demo session, but it's a game demo that allows us to add music and sound effects. It's freely available. It's free for our use for educational and non-commercial reasons. So we can put music in it, and it's a working, functioning Mac game that we can, we're going to replace all of the music and sound effects. So, the game itself, it's called 2D Platformer because it is a 2D game. The only thing you can do is move left and right and jump up and down, or fall down. And it is a platformer game because it's all about running and jumping and shooting, or sometimes it's like punching, or like Super Mario Brothers is a platform game where you jump on characters' heads. And as you can see so far, it's a pretty silly and wacky and ridiculous kind of game. You are a bean with a mustache and a monocle and a bowler hat and a bazooka, and you are fending off the alien invasion. The aliens have invaded London, and you can tell because this is London Bridge. It has fallen down. Over here is Big Ben and the London Eye. Everything's kind of destroyed because the aliens have come to town, and for some reason you are the only thing that can save humanity or the rest of the beans, and you are equipped with the bazooka to conquer the aliens. And as a game, there's really no ending to it. As you can see, there's a score above. There's no end overall. The game just keeps going and going and going. But it's a good vehicle to demonstrate and show off our music. And we're going to talk about how our music is going to play back and how it's going to interact in the game. This game is built off of the idea of intros, main loops, and endings. It is, when the game starts, there is going to be a 2-bar intro that plays. Then as the player is playing the game, there will be a series of 8-bar loops that play. And then when the character loses all of their health and dies and the game starts over, then there is an ending set of cues that can play. So our music will be divided up into 9 files that can be arranged and rearranged into different orders to play back. So I'll get into that idea, the idea of intros, main loops, and endings. Sometimes it's known as start, loop, and stop. or beginning, middle, and end, or something like that, where it's a very common approach to how music can play back in a game. Let's talk about the style and musical or the compositional approach to everything. As you can see, the game is kind of ridiculous. It's kind of lighthearted and fun. This is probably would be perfect as a mobile game, all ages, family-friendly kind of game, where the music is going to be kind of upbeat and lighthearted overall. Nothing too intense or epic or depressing or yeah, nothing too serious or intense. Hold on just a moment, please. Excuse me. So nothing, yeah, too melancholy or serious or intense. And two different approaches. Well, I guess I should start with musically, your choice of theme or genre. I'm going to leave more up to you for this first composition. Your choice of instrumentation, your overall approach. I'm more focused on you understanding the entire process, not necessarily following a specific guideline or requirement to the composition. Now, there's still requirements overall and still certain guidelines that you have to meet. But stylistically, the genre and the approach, basically, I start with upbeat, all ages, family-friendly, lighthearted, zany, silly, wacky kind of approach to the music. Also, there is you're in London, or it's set there, so there could be a British influence. And there is an alien invasion. So it could have kind of a campy sci-fi kind of feel to it also. Other ideas that might work. So let me bring up, not that one. I'm going to bring up a PDF here for this assignment. Along with the game, you get the video that I've been showing, and along with all of that, you get the PDF that describes all sorts of different aspects of the project. So, project overview is a lot of what I'm talking about here. Describes a bit about intros, main loops, and endings. Game overview discusses the fact that 2D platformer games have a long pedigree in the industry. Super Mario Brothers, Donkey Kong, Metroid were all 2D platformer games. So it's a very common approach even still. There's a lot of games that could fall into this category, and it's generally a more straightforward approach and a good project to start out with for the month. Musical style, so a bit open overall, but I do mention Monty Python meets Mars Attacks or Benny Hill versus the Body Snatchers. So a little bit of British influence or a little bit of sci-fi influence. You can go in one of those directions if you'd like. How to play. The game is pretty straightforward to play, and hopefully you definitely should open it up and play the game and check it out. But let me do this. When you launch the game, it brings this window up, and more than likely you can just hit play and it'll play just fine for you. If you understand and want to change the screen resolution here, you can do that. The graphics quality is probably not going to change all that much because it's really not all that graphics intensive. It's a pretty light game overall. You can turn windowed off, and that would play full screen if you wanted to try that. And then once you play the game, then moving left, moving right, jumping. Mainly you can use the arrow keys. Left and right will move left and right. Spacebar will jump, or you can push up to jump. Left click on your mouse or on your touchpad will fire the bazooka. You can also hit control to fire that. Yeah, so it should hopefully be straightforward. in the gameplay. Again, your ability to actually play the game beyond just enjoying it and checking it out and giving a sense for what the game's about and understanding what it's all about. That's really the purpose there. The instrumentation. Your choice of instrumentation, your choice of genre, I leave more up to your discretion. I do ask that it is a full composition. There is drums, bass, harmony, melody, a couple of instruments, counter melody, a couple of instruments for your harmony, a couple of layers for harmony. All of those are definitely good approaches. So a good number or a layer, a good number of instruments for each one of those layers should work out overall. And you need to make sure that the music is going to be consistent all the way across the different files. So as we go, we said that the main focus of the music for this game is the idea of intros, main loops, and endings. So as you transition from the beginning and the middle and the end of your composition, you need to have consistent instrumentation. It basically needs to feel like the same band playing the same piece of music all the way through, even though our music is going to be divided up into separate files. This is really where I want to get to and want a very important part of this PDF, the asset list. And this is going to show us all of the files that you will need to create for this project. The main delivery, the main thing that you will deliver to me is 9 files and a screenshot of your logic session. Or you can actually use any DAW you would like, any set of tools that you would like, but just give me a screenshot of your session so I can see how you have things set up. So for this project, you will deliver a series of 9 files. Those files are going to be grouped in 3 groups of 3. So we have 3 intros, music intro 01, music intro 02, and music intro 03. 3 main loops, main loop 1, 2, and 3, and 3 endings, ending 1, 2, and 3. Frederick. Says, sorry I'm late, no problem. Thanks for joining us. I can mention earlier you can catch the archive later on to pick anything up as you need it. Notice that all of our files are set up as a 16-bit 44.1. Everything's set up as stereo. And there's a column here for looping, whether the files loop or not. Each one of your main loops, as noted, are set up to loop, or they need to loop, and we'll talk about what that means here. Now, your intro files, they are going to be 2 bars long. Your 3 main loop files, they're each going to be 8 bars long. And your 3 ending files are also going to be 2 bars long. And I have a series of examples here. In a few minutes, we'll go over those so we can actually hear what's happening. Okay, so let me kind of describe how this works. Here's the video. We'll jump back to the top. And let's see. We have 3 intro files. When the game starts, the character drops down onto the platform and the game music will start. And the game knows that there is supposed to be 3 intro files. Hold on just a second. Excuse me. 3 intro files, and the game, when the game starts, it says, okay, what do I do now? And it looks at the computer, or looks at the code and says, all right, there are 3 intro files, and they should be named. Now, you need to make sure that you name your files exactly this, or the computer will not work with them. We'll talk later. There's a very specific folder that you place all of your audio files in. If they are named exactly according to this asset list, they are 16-bit and 44, the sample rate of 44.1. They're stereo files, then the game will work. If any of the formatting is incorrect, then the game is dumb enough not to know what the heck it's trying to do, and it doesn't know that you meant to spell it differently or you meant to choose a different sample rate or bit depth. It's just not going to work. So we have to make sure everything's formatted correctly. And it says there are 3 intro files. Randomly choose one of them and then play it. So the game starts and it randomly chooses one of these 2-bar long files, intro 1, 2, or 3. It doesn't know anything about your music except for when it starts and stops. So once those 2 bars are over, then the game says, what do I do next? And somewhere in the code it says, okay, there are 3 main loop files, and we are going to randomly choose one of those main loop files, and we're going to play it from beginning to end. And then when we end, we're just going to randomly choose another main loop file and play it from beginning to end. And then we're going to randomly choose another main loop file and just keep going like that. And it could actually choose the same one over and over again. So this is where the challenge of your composition really comes in. At the end of any one of these files, it has to be able to jump to the beginning of any of the other files, even back to the top, like as a loop. Hold on again. Excuse me. So you basically have a fork in the road, a 3-pronged fork in the road, where at the end of any one of your pieces of music, it has to be able to jump from the end of main loop 1 back to the beginning of main loop 1, or back to the beginning of main loop 2, or back to the beginning of main loop 3. So that means your composition needs to maintain the same tempo, the same time signature, and the same key all the way along so that it makes sense as it jumps around. We don't know how long anybody's going to play the game. So as long as they are playing it, and as long as they are winning at the same time, then these main loops will keep playing. But if at any time they lose, then it's immediately going to shut off one of these main loop cues and jump to one of the endings. So game starts. It randomly chooses main loop 2, let's say. It finishes main loop 2 and then randomly it chooses intro 2, and then once it finishes intro 2, it jumps to main loop 1, then it jumps to main loop 3, then it jumps to main loop 3 again, then 2, then back to 1, then 3. And it just, most of your gameplay is 8-bar loops that are shuffling around. So they need to feel like 3 variations on the same song. They need to have variations in the percussion and the drum pattern. They need to have variations in the bass line, the chord progression or the harmony, and the melody. Probably mostly in your melody, you'll have strong development and strong change so that you can hear the changes from one to the next. And then at some point, and I'm just going to fast forward here. Now, you might notice here that your main character has a health bar right on top. And as they lose health, they get hit and they lose health, eventually they're going to run out of health. So you can see he's right at the end here, and he's going to get hit, and the character falls into the toxic sludge below, loses his hat, loses his weapon, and eventually the game starts over again. So at this point, the different main loops are playing, and as soon as they lose the last bit of health, it's going to immediately cut off the main loop cue, whatever was playing, and jump over to one of the ending cues. So we have 2-bar endings. The endings need to end and resolve the music. It needs to put a final period at the end of the sentence. It needs to resolve everything Drums need to, typically they have a roll or a fill to a final crash, or the chord progression resolves back to the tonic. The melody goes back to the tonic. Everything kind of resolves to a final point there, and has one final hit and ends, giving everything time to fade out to silence. So that is generally how the music is set up, and let's go ahead and bring up some examples here, show you how this is going to work. I'm probably not going to play through all of these, but I'll just jump around a bit. So what we are seeing here, these are all student examples. And let's see, these are your music intros. These are all the 2-bar intros. So each track is a separate student example. And this column here are 3 intros. This column here are 3 main loops. Notice that these are 8 bars and these are 2 bars. And these are 3 ending cues. And the only reason that they're out of order like this is because that's alphabetically how they import. So we are actually going to start over here on the main loops and discuss this approach, or it kind of gives us an overview of how everything's going to sound, and then we can see how the intros go into that music. The intros need to build up in intensity and anticipation heading into the main loops, and the ending cues need to resolve to an ending. So it builds up, plays through the main loops, and resolves to a finish. All right. Let's go ahead and play through the first one here. I guess I can point out that the main loops are set up to loop. Notice that they are the full 8 bars with no gaps or anything. You want to have these transitions be as seamless as possible. You'll notice a variation and change as you go from one cue to the next, mostly in the melody, but in the rest of the instrumentation too. Here comes the first change. Variation in the melody, variation in the progression. Third variation and change. And notice that the end of 3 can just jump back to 1, no problem. I could stay in 1 here. If I go to the end and listen to the loop. And then you could just sit there and go around and around, or jump, excuse me, jump to any of the other cues in whichever order that makes sense. If I go to the 3 intros over here, these should build up. The end of an intro will basically butt up to the beginning of your next main loop. So we'll play each one of these, and then the third one will show you how it ties in. So they should have a little gap in between them so you can actually hear what it's building up to. So here is the third intro going into the first main loop. And this is what you have to focus on, is that intro 1 does not always go to main loop 1, which doesn't always go to ending 1. Intro 1 can go to main loop 2, which can go to ending 3, or any sort of combination. So all 9 files have to go with all 9 other files. Here we go. So it should transition nicely. It's typically one good option in order to make sure that whenever you switch from main loop 1 to 2 to 3, that it still makes sense. You need to make sure that it makes sense harmonically and melodically and rhythmically. It often works to start on the tonic of each one of these cues, or at least start on the same chord, so you know wherever you wander off to in those 8 bars, you always have the signpost where you can resolve back to at the beginning of each cue. And with the intros, it's often a good thing to, you start lower in intensity and maybe even in pitch, and it's often rising up with more velocity and more volume. Often the melody goes in an upward direction. You can maybe hang on some suspension or some 4 or 5 chord right before you drop on the tonic in the downbeat of any one of the main loops. So that's a pretty solid approach overall. One thing to point out with this intro, this has got an issue with it. Listen to the last crash cymbal at the end of this file. We'll start here. It gets cut off at the end. So you want to watch out for anything that would lay over into the next file. Any reverb, instrument decay, crash cymbal that might get cut off by the end of these files or the end of these loops over here. And there is one of the approaches in the looping game music assignment discusses this and how you might avoid cutting things off at the end of your loop. Let's try another example here. Here are 3 more main loops. So there's the first 8 bars. Change to the rhythm, the melody and harmony, certainly. So they can be arranged in any sort of order. Here's 3 intros building up into that. And they all kind of hang on that last chord, ready to drop into any one of those main loops. Notice that... Oh, I don't think I played any one of these endings here because I need to point out something. Notice with these endings that there is room here for everything to end and fade to silence. So they provide a strong cadence, a strong resolution to an end. All right, and so they make logical sense to end the music, and they do so with enough time to reach silence. Here's the previous one. 3 ending cues here. Now notice, and actually pull these apart a little bit to show you that the endings do get cut off. Notice how the audio goes all the way to the end of the file, while these have a little bit of room or silence at the end. You might want to leave a little bit of space for, like I said, cymbal crashes, decay, reverb, all that stuff. The last part of the cymbal crashes are always getting cut off there. We want to avoid that. Let's see. Let's jump around a little bit more. Let's try this one. The first couple that I've shown are more kind of modeled off of acoustic instrumentation. There's certainly more synth directions that you can go also. This one has a real strong lead melody that changes from one to the next. As I said, we're looking for high energy, lots of kind of upbeat pace to it to kind of drive the action forward. Here's 3 intros. And 3 endings. All resolving to that final tonic. We'll do one more here. We'll jump all the way down here. So that one's got a kind of a classic arcade kind of feel. I do want to throw the idea out there that there is a full chiptune composition here. So sometimes what I'll get is a chiptune composition for this one. And you don't want to throw out all of your ideas in this first project and not leave something up for the other project, or you want to bring a little bit more variation overall. So, but whether you want to go for more of a synth approach or more of a acoustic instrumentation, whatever works best for you, that hopefully gives you a sense of how your 2D platformer composition will be set up. Please let me know if you have any questions. So a couple of suggestions for this. Compose interesting loops. Looping does not mean repetitive. A lot of times what I will get is in an 8-bar loop, it will be 2 4-bar loops back to back, or the same 4-bar loop back to back, or the same 2-bar loop played 4 times for an 8-bar. So watch out. The music is going to be repetitive enough on its own. You want to avoid more repetition by repeating phrasing or melodic ideas or chord progressions or drum patterns over and over and over again. Transitions, make sure that your loops transition fluidly. So maintaining the same key, maintaining the same tempo and the time signature all the way through, so that it gets really odd as it jumps around wildly. Same thing goes with instrumentation. If you have wildly different drum kits and bass and synth lines, you can certainly like add and subtract different instruments, but having just a entirely different band play from one to the next, you want to maintain similar instrumentation but have variation in the composition. So yeah, that's keep same tempo also. Create continuous loops, no gaps, no clicks or pops or fades. Listen to your bounced files. Don't just trust that what you bounced out into a WAV file is correct. That's why you re-import them back into a session and listen to them and work with them to make sure everything's set up. You do have control over the overall mix because you are doing both music and sound effects. So pay attention, listen to the original sound effects in the game, listen to your music as you create your own sound effects, and just make sure everything is balanced appropriately. Putting your music in the game. Now, once you have everything set up properly, You can and bounced out all of your WAV files. You can take your music. Let me get some desktop here. You can take your music and place your music in the game and test it all out. There's no better way of understanding how your music is going to work than actually putting it into the game and playing it. So this is the game application that you get. Again, as you double click this, it opens up and you have this window to start the game. But you can right click on this application and go to Show Package Contents. In there is a folder appropriately named Contents. You can go into Contents, you can go to Data and Streaming Assets. Inside of Streaming Assets, there are two folders that you should recognize: Music and Sound Effects. These are all of the original sound effects, and next week you will be replacing these, but when you play the game, these are the sounds that you hear. So you can use these as a reference. This music folder, which is empty, that's your job. That's where you will be placing all of your music files. And I don't particularly expect you to remember right off the top that path, but you'll place your music in this particular folder. And then the next time you load and play the game, you will hear your music. Test it out, listen to it, make sure it works properly, make sure there's no issues in the playback. And then you will send all of your, you'll take a screenshot of your DAW session, and then you'll zip everything up and send me all of the files. You can also submit the files, you can also submit the files to the peer review, and you're certainly encouraged to do that. We can check everything out and see how it sounds. The next game for week two, starting in week 3, your second project of the month is called Angry Bots. And this is certainly a much different game. Requires a different type of music and a different approach overall to how the music plays back in the game. So this game focuses much more on the idea of ambient and action, where the player is going to battle with all of these different robots, and each one of them has their own musical theme that is heard as they are engaged in this battle. So you are this mercenary kind of infiltrating a robot factory, and the robots are certainly none too happy that you're there, and they come out to attack, and you have to dispense of them one by one as you progress further and further into the game world. This is also made by Unity Games. It's publicly available. It's available in the iOS and App Store. I think it's still there. We have just set it up with a particular approach to the music, and we will talk about how the music works in this game and how it is formatted. So that is the next week, and your production technique. This is your looping assignment for this week. Let's talk about a couple of different looping approaches here and what this assignment is all about. All right, let's see. I'm going to close a few things and get them out of the way. When you download this assignment, you get a logic session. And that logic session has a couple of different folder tracks with different techniques for creating music loops. So, a looping piece of music needs to be able, when it reaches the end of the file, needs to return back to the top to play over and over and over again. And this allows us to stay in one piece of music as we loop around, and allows us to react to the changes in the music system by sitting in one place and waiting for some change to happen. When you download this assignment, you get a logic session. Let me get this set up here. There is a section for notes. Basically gives a quick overview of everything in the game, or sorry, in this session. And the session is, or the project is divided into 3 parts, and each of these are different folder tracks. And all you have to do is double click on a region, and it will take you into that folder. And there's an arrow in the top left-hand corner. And press that to jump back out. Double click on a region, it goes into the folder track, and go back and forth like that. So there are 3 different techniques. The first one here is editing loops and looping files. Hopefully maybe you've edited a loop before or created a loop at some point. This is known as topping and tailing a loop, basically finding the beginning of the edited loop, making a cut, finding the end of it, making another cut, and checking to see how it loops overall. So there is a piece of music here that has 3 different, basically like 3 different intensities of music. You are going to cut out and edit 3 different loops. Let me give you a quick example here. I always suggest that you drag your work down to an edit track. That way you can completely screw up everything here and always go back to the original if necessary. And you can get quick access to the original. Let's see. So we're going to edit a quick loop out of this. So what we're doing is we're finding the downbeat. And the loop, this is very kind of rhythmic and loopable music. Kind of a 4 on the floor beat. And I guess it helps if I bring up my fader. So there are obvious points where this music loops. There's often crash cymbals that allows us to really easily find the downbeat. Like that. That's a crash cymbal. That's going to be my downbeat, and that's going to be the start of my loop. So I find that. All right, so that looks like my crash. So I'm going to zoom way in here down to the sample level and just find a good 0 crossing point and split this region and find the beginning of my loop there. Then I'll hit play again, and I think it's 4 bars here before I find the end of my loop. I find the next crash cymbal right there. And that's going to be the end of my loop. Zoom far in, split that region, and now I should be able to listen to the loop. I'll listen to this. There should be no gaps or rhythmic interruptions as the loop goes around and around. And you're going to do that in these other pieces of music. It gets a little bit more intense. Or it's over here. And then over here. So you'll chop out 3 different intensity loops, and I'm just going to totally fake it here and say like that's another loop and that's another loop, and you chop these out. And you'd end up with 3 different loops that you'd bounce and name and format. So hopefully that's nothing mind-blowing. That's pretty straightforward, topping and tailing a loop. The next thing that we will check out is part 2. And this is, will have you looping MIDI information that, creating seamless loops from MIDI instruments. And as we heard earlier, there's the opportunity of cutting off instruments and cymbal crashes and reverb at the end of a file. An 8-bar loop may have a little bit of extra sound that bleeds over beyond that 8 bars that would get chopped off if bounced to audio. So let me give you an example what I mean and how we're going to approach this. So right here, this is kind of a short 4-bar electronic loop that we want. It's all in MIDI, and we want to bounce this to audio. Now at the very end of this loop, there is a cymbal crash. Let's listen to that. That cymbal crash goes over the edge of the loop. If I hit stop there, we can hear that. There's instrument decay, there's reverb tail, and if we want to bounce this, we're going to find that that's going to get, all of that stuff is going to get cut off. So I'm going to start out by highlighting everything, get ready for a bounce, and I want to do an offline bounce. I don't want to include audio tail, 16-bit, 44.1, interleaved, add it back to the project. That should all be fine. I'll bounce that out. I'll call it electronic 12. And let's see, it should be in my project. Project. Should clean out my previous versions of this. What did I say, electronic 12? So I bring this file in. Oops, I need a new track. Audio track, yes, 1. Bring this in. And if I listen to this, everything should be fine, but listen to that cymbal crash at the end. It gets cut off in the bounce because there's a little bit of cymbal crash that overlaps that 8th bar into bar 9, or in this case, I guess, bar 197. So we want to make sure we capture all of that stuff. We want to make sure this is seamless as possible and we don't lose any of that extra information. So let me get rid of this, and to fix this, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight all of our MIDI information. We're going to duplicate it. Oops, let's not do that. We're going to duplicate it by holding Option and dragging it out over here. Actually, I think I can hit... No, I can hit... oh, come on. Stop. I can hit Apple R. Does that repeat? There it goes. I can hit Apple R, or I can Option drag it. Basically, I want to take the exact same MIDI information and drag it out twice as long. And then I am ready to bounce this. So I go ahead and hit Apple B to bounce it. Offline, no audio tail. Everything should be good. I'm going to add this back in. And I'll name this 13. Basically, do the exact same thing, but bounce it out twice as long. And then I can drop this audio file back in there. Oops. And all I need to do now is go halfway through the audio file, split it in half, and then delete the first half. And now I'm only going to use the second half. When I listen to this, you're going to hear a seamless loop as it goes around and around. Yeah. The cymbal crash that used to get cut off at the end here is actually captured at the beginning because it used to be part of this file over here. So it does get cut off. It just catches back up on the other side of the loop. And actually, when it first starts, you hear a little bit of the phantom cymbal. But this creates a seamless loop. And that can be a little bit more invisible to kind of fool the player so that they don't know that they're stuck in the loop. So what I did here is I took my original MIDI information, I doubled the length of everything, I then bounced it out twice as long, I chopped it in half and deleted the first half, and then I'll bounce the second half out as a single file and name it appropriately. You're going to do the same thing over here. This is orchestral instruments, an orchestral loop, and it has a lot of reverb and instrument decay at the end that would get cut off in a typical loop. So you're going to do the same thing and eventually bounce this one out in multiple stems. So you'll bounce all of the woodwinds together, all of the brass together, and all of the percussion, and then the percussion strings go together. And I'll just play this to give you a sense of what this sounds like. So you'll be bouncing that out into stems, and those stems can loop together, and then those different loops can be arranged in different orders. And a very common approach to looping music for games. And then the third part here, double click in there and back to audio files. This is creating loops from instruments and music that doesn't easily loop. And these files, again, I'm going to take the first one and drag it down, hold Option and copy it down to make a working version. This is a very interesting synth bass layer for much the rest of a composition. So this is interesting, kind of interesting tones overall. So that might be a cool bass layer for the rest of my composition. But it's not easy to loop. There is a lot of change in the timbre and the volume and the pitch of the synth that's playing there. And it's not easy to loop overall. And I'm just going to hack away at this and see how close I get, as if I spent a whole bunch of time to make this loop. And just see what it sounds like. See how it sounds when it reaches the end and goes back to the front. You can hear a real obvious shift as it goes from the ending back to the beginning. Right, so that wouldn't be a very, it would be a very obvious loop. It would not be a easy thing to loop overall. So, what we're going to do is we're going to make this loop very easily. We have an approach here that you can do this almost blindly to create kind of ambient loops. This works very well with like sound effect ambiances, wind noise, room tone, or bass kind of pad synth layers. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to chop a section out of here, and typically the chunk that I edit out of the middle is a little bit longer than what I want my final version to be. This works a little bit easier if you don't care if it's a specific length. I mean, you can set it up so if you need exactly 25 seconds of a loop, you can do that. But if you're just making a cool loop that you're going to put at a bottom layer of a piece of music, maybe it's a little easier if you can if the exact length of everything doesn't matter. But either way, it does work. So I'm going to take this chunk and I'm going to chop it in half. I don't need to be perfectly in half, but I'm going to go somewhere in the middle and split the file in two. Then I'm going to take the left part of it and drag it over the right part. I'm not going to go all the way past it, but I'm going to leave a bit of overlap between them. So I take this part and I move it over here and overlap it. Now the outside edges are perfectly looped because they used to be the inside edges. And I just switched the order of them. And so those are perfect because they used to be seamless. But the problem now is the middle. It's going to still be very obvious in that transition. Right in that section, you can really hear it. And so we can easily fix that by doing a fade. I can just take my fade tool and go across here and create a nice long fade. So the old one fades out while the new one fades in, and it creates a constant effect for this loop. Now I've created a seamless loop where the outside edges work perfectly and it crossfades through the middle. So if you need that going in the background when you have rhythm on top of that and the rest of the composition comes in, that works very well. A lot of sound design and effects can use that very easily. But it only works on non-rhythmic material, pads and synths and things like that. If that was a drum loop, you would have completely destroyed the rhythm. I mean, you could probably still make it work if you paid attention to the rhythm at the beginning and the end of the loop, but this works. And the important thing is, notice that you don't have to particularly focus on the process. If it's a whole bunch of wind noise and gusts and cool synth things happening, maybe it doesn't have to be perfect, and you can kind of just do this blindly. So really what I did here was I chopped a section out, I deleted the beginning and the end of it, and then I chopped this part in half and I flipped it over, flipped the two sides, and then I just crossfaded the middle. And it works every time. You can do it without even listening to it, and at least it'll end up perfect. Now, of course, you want to actually pay attention to what you're editing and make sure that it sounds the way you want it to. But when you've got a whole bunch of these, you've got a whole bunch of ambiences to build for a game, or you have a whole bunch of pads and drones that you need to build for your music soundtrack, this works out very well to create invisible loops. All right, so 3 different techniques for looping, whether it's audio files or MIDI. That should give you some insight. Whoops, I disappeared. The other thing to point out here is that there is a PDF that you get with this assignment that goes through its slides step-by-step process to go through everything. So it talks about different folders, how to navigate through the session, and how to build the individual loops. So this should take you step by step through the whole process, and you should have a pretty easy approach to how to properly build loops, because you're going to then use it over and over again throughout all of your compositions, because every composition you do will need to have looping music. All right, that is it from me. That should give you a good set of information for the first week and a solid direction for your assignments. I'll stick around for a few minutes after class if you have any questions. And again, if you're catching this on the archive, or I don't know how this would actually work, but anyway, the archives are available Wednesday and Friday. After each one of our Tuesday and Thursday sessions. All of your assignments are due on Sunday by the end of the week. And please reach out with any questions that you might have. All right, thank you very much, and I will see you again on Thursday.